Rachel concludes this chapter then by presenting a reformulated version of the argument from mercy. And I call this version the everybody's best interest version. And so the first premise of this version of the argument modifies that initial principle that we found in the utilitarian version. And it says, if an action promotes the best interests of everyone concerned and violates no one's rights, then the action is morally acceptable. So notice that we're promoting the interests of everyone. So we're taking the terminally ill patient's interest into account. We're considering his wife, the doctors, the hospital, and so on. So all the individuals who are affected by it are taken into consideration, right? And we're trying to promote their interests, every one of them. And then we're also trying to do it in a way that respects the rights of all the individuals that are involved as well. So there's this additional consideration, this additional feature besides the promotion of happiness or the prevention of pain. We're trying, in fact, to maximize every individual's happiness, not just the total net happiness. And we're trying to do it in a way that respects the rights of the individuals. And we then conclude that if that action, in fact, satisfies that standard, then it is morally acceptable. The second premise says that in at least some cases, active euthanasia, that is, actively ending a person's life at their request, promotes the best interests of everyone concerned and violates no one's rights. So the second premise is a claim about whether or not there exist such cases out in the world. And it says there affirmatively do exist such cases, and that's one of the reasons why we find him discussing the specifics of the Jack case in light of this argument that he has presented. We're talking about how, look, in that Jack case, we would have been promoting his best interest by sparing him this long period of agony with no hope of ever recovering. And we'd be sparing the interest of his wife, who was surely, Rachel suggests, torn apart by having to watch her husband suffer in this way. And we'd be promoting the interests of the hospital, and who wants to devote resources in the way that makes the most sense given the prognosis of the people that are in the hospital, and so on. And so he goes through and talks about that case that Alsop relates to us of Jack in sort of detail, trying to show both how that principle would be applied and trying to suggest to us that there are real plausible cases out there in the world that would satisfy this kind of principle. And then he concludes, therefore, in at least some cases, active euthanasia is morally acceptable. So we have a different principle being assumed in our first premise there, modified. It's got more considerations that are being taken into account. Happiness isn't just a summed quantity, but we're trying to balance the interests of every individual. So with that, we're trying to treat them with equal consideration. And then our conclusion, as expressed in our line number 3 here, is that active euthanasia is, in some cases, morally acceptable. So it's not a universal claim. It says that there are instances where it is morally acceptable, and it also differs from the utilitarian version of the argument because it doesn't claim that it's morally obligatory, it doesn't claim that it's morally praiseworthy, it claims that it's morally acceptable. It doesn't say you have to do that. It doesn't say you should be praised for doing that. It just says that you shouldn't suffer moral condemnation. It's morally permissible for you to do that in these cases that satisfy that criteria.